My name is Robin Lee. Welcome to Buzz on the Bluffs, Vicksburg, Mississippi's Community Insights program. We're going to be looking at people, places, and events which impact our community. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining me today. We have a special guest with us via Skype, so you will notice that our format's a little different. I'm happy to have with me Nadia Hashimi. I believe we're Skyping you from, are you in Baltimore?
I'm in Maryland, but I'm south of Baltimore. Okay. So I'm about 20-30 minutes outside of D.C.
Well,
Maryland, yeah.
Glad to have you as a guest today. And the reason that we're doing this is I read a book that you wrote, which was actually your very first book. And it's called The Pearl That Broke Its Shell. And a friend of mine gave it to me last year, I guess just shortly after it was released. And as you know, because I've messaged you several times on Facebook, I could not put the book down. So I made contact with you, and now you have another book that's about to come out, and I can't wait. And I know you're tired of hearing me saying when, and now we know it's coming out in July. So tell me about, without giving anything away, because now I've got a lot of people in Vicksburg that have read the book and are reading the book, and they can't put it down either, so we don't want to give anything away, but just tell us a little bit about the book.
So The Pearl That Broke Its Shell is a story of two Afghan women, and they're in very different time periods. So the first character is around the turn of the century. She's born around 1900 in the time of monarchs and very, limited resources throughout the country. And she's disfigured early on in her life, and she's also then orphaned by a cholera epidemic. And she sort of becomes this servant that's passed from home to home. And along the way, she becomes a guard serving in the king's harem. She is a woman dressed as a man because that particular king, and this is something that actually did happen in Afghanistan's history, that particular king did not trust men to guard his harem wives. So he brought women in who would dress as men. And so she, with all these struggles, tries to find a way to assert a little bit of independence and a little bit of her own decision-making into her life. The second story is her great-great-granddaughter, who draws on her ancestors' legacy of being really persistent and refusing to kind of accept the status quo. She's a young girl in post-Taliban Afghanistan.
And what are their names, Nadia?
So the first character that we meet earlier in the book is Shakeba.
Okay.
And then we meet young Rahima.
Okay.
And
Rahima, what is that? I'm sorry to interrupt you. What is that term when the female dresses as the male? What is that called?
So Rahima is the one who's transformed into a bacha posh. And bacha posh, bacha means boy, and posh means to be worn. So the term together really means dressed as a boy. And that's what she is. And it's a custom that's practiced in Afghanistan commonly enough that nearly every Afghan who's raised in Afghanistan will know of one, either in the family or in the neighborhood or a cousin's cousin or somewhere along the line. There's some degree of connection to one. It's not every single family. It happens across socioeconomic lines. And it's something that sort of fills a void because Afghan society has been really deeply patriarchal. So families that don't have a son feel an emptiness where a son should be, and sometimes they will transform a daughter for a few years before she hits puberty, because really at that time she should be transformed back to a girl.
And is that still practiced in the Afghan culture today?
It is. It is. It's probably to a lesser extent, but we really don't have much information in terms of statistics or how often it happens. There is not enough information on demographics in Afghanistan, just in general, and then to chart out this one little sliver of society and how often it's happening, since it's so transient also, it's really hard to track.
Yeah. So I interrupted the story about the great-great-granddaughter.
So she goes on, she becomes a bacha posh because she's the middle of 5 sisters, and she starts to really enjoy her experiences as a boy. It's a very different life. And then all of that is taken away from her rather abruptly and rudely by her family when she is transformed back into a girl. And she's married to a warlord at the age of 13 to become his 4th wife. And so from there on, no spoiler alerts, And it's the rest of the story is her trying to figure out how she can survive in that particular world.
And what she's going to do.
Right.
Yeah, it's hard not to talk about it. I just, this is the first time you and I have ever talked, so I just want to talk about it, but then I don't want to spoil the book for all my friends that I know probably are sitting at lunch break right now reading it because they can't put the book down.
Oh, that's amazing to hear.
Yeah. Okay, so I just picked up the paperback. I had it in hardback, and I've passed it on to somebody, so I got the paperback, and I'm glad that I got it because there's some additional information in the paperback than what was in the hardback when it first came out. And that was some of your family history, which I found so interesting. Your parents came over here before the Soviet invasion. They were born and raised in Afghanistan, is that correct?
Yes.
And had never been back. And your family went over there in 2002. Mm-hmm. And you know what? When I was reading some of that family history, what just kept recurring in my mind was their brothers and sisters did not leave. It, if I understand correctly, it was primarily just your mom and dad and a few other family members that came over. Did you ever have thoughts about why they got out and the others didn't?
So, we have a really large family, and a lot of my family, my parents were some of the first Afghan people to come to the United States. So when they came, there was really not a population here. They were sort of isolated. They had a couple of friends. And then slowly with time, and as things really took a turn for the worse in Afghanistan, more and more people came over. But being that my family is so large, we had family everywhere as people were escaping Afghanistan. So people in Europe and Australia and India, anywhere you could think of in Africa, there were people from our family everywhere. At the same time, we did have some family still living in Afghanistan. So my father had a couple of brothers and one sister. On my mom's side of the family, most of her family left and got out, her siblings, although it was sort of a trickle, so it didn't all happen at once. It was, year by year, as things were getting worse and worse, another sibling would come out. But yes, I did have family members, cousins, that I didn't really know because we grew up in two different worlds. But knowing that I had cousins or they were my female counterpart situation for girls.
I think we are losing our connection here. Are you still there?
I'm here.
Okay, I think we had a little interruption there for a second.
Okay.
So a lot of your family did get out, and it sounds like they just kind of went wherever they could escape to at the time. And then your family went back later. And what I read that you wrote is at the time that y'all went over there, you were not at that point thinking about writing a book. You were just going back to your parents' homeland.
I wanted to go to the homeland. I wanted to see it. I wanted to be there with them. And I also was in medical school at the time. So I went there sort of wanting to see it from the standpoint of, what I'm studying now, what in that field is going on in Afghanistan. So I made some trips to local schools to see how the schools were being rebuilt, to visit the hospitals. I spoke with the, Deputy of Public Health from the Ministry of Health, and I sort of wanted to do my own little assessment for no reason other than, I guess, just me being nosy and wanting to know what was happening in the country.
So how did you go from that to then coming home? And it was quite a few years later. You did your residency, and it was a number of years before you sat down and started writing this book. So what was going on in that interim?
I was going through the motions. I was becoming a practicing pediatrician, and so that's I had certain steps that I had to take. And writing was not anything that was on my mind. I dreamed of writing when I was maybe in second grade, but not since then. Since then, sort of, there are very few people, I think, those are the special writers who dream of being a writer all their lives, who really have that passion for it. And I had been really caught up doing other things. But by the time I finished my training, my husband and I had been married for about a year, and I always say that I feel like maybe he was just getting tired of watching me ignore him on vacations with my nose in a book. And he sort of had this inkling that I think you can write something. Why don't you just write a story instead of just, reading all of them? And it was really with his encouragement that I said, you know what, maybe I will try it. And if I do try it, what are the stories that I would want to talk about? And that's where this came from. It's really his encouragement too.
Well, one of the things I loved about your book, first of all, it's hard for me to believe this is your first book because you have such great character development. In those first couple of chapters, I was trying to get everybody straight in my head and struggling with the names and coming up with my own Mississippi pronunciation of those names. But then, everything just clicked in about that third chapter. And your character development, you go from starting a book about a culture I know absolutely nothing about and ending it and feeling like I know these people. I mean, really to the point, I don't know if you recall this because I'm sure a lot of people message you. The minute I finished that book, I went on Facebook and found you and sent you a message and said, surely you're working on another book.
I remember your message because you made me chuckle, and it means so much. And I've had the really distinct privilege of actually hearing from people, which is the beauty of being a writer today, that we have things like Facebook.
True.
And different kinds of social media platforms or websites that I'm getting emails and I'm getting messages from people who are telling me such different things, but that are all so amazing. Either I stayed up all night to finish it, or I really need to know what happens to Rahima after, or, someone the other day was like, I really wanted to adopt an Afghan girl after I finished your book, and I looked into it, or a gentleman wrote to me and said, you've really given me such empathy for women in other parts of the world. And I don't take any of those messages lightly. I mean, I kind of just am collecting them and trying to figure out how this happened, but there's no other response that I could ask for. It's been incredible.
Yeah, it's really neat in this day and age that you get to actually have direct contact with your readers.
It is, because it's such a solitary process. I mean, I sat in a dark room for 9 months and wrote this book. And so to have other people finally reading it so many years, it's been a few years now, it's really incredible to be hearing people who actually have taken time out of, everybody's got a busy schedule, who have taken that time out to sit down, read the story, connect with these characters who we all know are fictional, imaginary friends, right? And to feel compelled enough to write to me about it. It's very humbling.
Well, fictional and imaginary, but I also believe is probably an accurate depiction of the lives of women, not just in Afghanistan, but in other countries around the world. It's yes. Hard for us to appreciate the independence and the freedom we have when we don't, even reading it in a story, we don't really know what it's like, what these other women go through in other parts of the world.
Yeah, I think there's a real universality in the story, in what's happening to women. Afghanistan is not unique in the troubles that it's facing. It might face them to different degrees, but women here are not immune to the things that are happening to the girls who are in the book. I mean, we have domestic violence here. We have unequal pay. I mean, even as mild as that might sound, but the gender inequality is an issue globally.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have an event on April the 14th where we're going to Skype you in and talk about the book. And I'm rereading it just because it's been 8 or 9 months since I've read it. And even friends of mine who say, well, I'm not really a reader. They've gotten the book and have started it and can't put it down. So we're really excited. I'm excited because I know your next book, When the Moon is Low, is that the correct title?
That's it. You got it.
Is coming out in July. Unfortunately, it's not being released until after my vacation, so I'm going to have to read somebody else while I'm gone. But I will. I've already ordered my copy.
Good for you.
I've ordered my copy, so I'm ready. I'm ready when it comes in. Is there anything I didn't ask you that you want to talk about?
I think you've covered everything. I mean, I'm actually just really happy to talk to you finally after communicating over Facebook.
I know, it's exciting. It's exciting,
and it's really it's been a real pleasure for me to just get Pearl out there. I'm working also on a middle grade version of Rahima's story, and so a lot of people have wanted to share this story with a younger female audience.
Yes,
and it's not really easy because it's a tough book. So it's not really appropriate for all ages.
Right.
So I'm sort of right now tying up a middle grade story for the Bachaposh custom, and Rahima makes a guest appearance in there, so it's a bit of a spin-off. And I'm hoping to get that out soon too.
Well, that sounds great. We'll look forward to that. Nadia, thank you so much for joining me today. And in 2 months and 2 days, we will be Skyping again. And I look forward to that.
Thanks so much, Robin. Really appreciative of all your support for the book. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.